for a brand new show. Scooby Doo is here again, away we go.
Scooby Doo is running from a spooky ghost.
Shaggy isn't doing what he does the most. Hey, come on, get involved till the mystery is solved.
Hang around for Scooby Doo.
Hey, come on, get involved till the mystery is solved.
Hang around for Scooby Doo. That's my pal. Scooby Dooby Doo.
Hello again, my meddling Scooby Doo fans, and welcome to another review into the world of Scooby Doo. So last time we kicked off my 2025 Scooby Month with a review of Season 3, Episode 9 of the Scooby Doo Show. I hope you guys enjoyed that. We talked about the many good aspects of it and how it continued the streak of good episodes to 3, such as the cat creature being a very strong, unique villain that was fun and entertaining, the setting being very well executed, and the mystery being very compelling. But today is a very special day, because today is Scooby-Doo's 56th birthday. That's right, it's the 56th birthday of the Scooby Gang. So happy 56th birthday to our beloved Scooby Gang. And so in honor of their 56th birthday, I will be covering Season 3, Episode 10 of the Scooby Doo Show, titled The Creepy Creature of Vulture's Claw, which was released on November 11th, 1978. The short synopsis of the episode is, while visiting Vulture's Claw Botanical Gardens, owned by one of Velma's friends, Professor Greer, the gang confronts a 7-foot-tall praying mantis that roams the grounds and is scaring away Professor Greer's associates. So as per usual, I'll be watching Season 3, Episode 10 of the Scooby Doo Show on the Scooby Doo Are You, the complete series box set. This box set has both seasons of Scooby Doo Are You, as well as the third season of the Scooby Doo Show. Like I've said in my previous videos, if you guys are curious why the third season of the Scooby Doo Show is on a completely different series' box set, it's because Hanna-Barbera and Warner Brothers like to falsely advertise the third season of the Scooby Doo Show as a fake third season of Scooby Doo Are You, but I've established on the channel many times that there was no third season of Scooby Doo Are You. Scooby Doo Are You had only 2 seasons, while the Scooby Doo Show had 3 seasons. Now, as far as this episode's reception is concerned, I believe most fans aren't really too fond of this episode. I don't really hear a lot of discussion on this episode, so I'm not really sure what the Scooby-Doo community feels about it. But I don't hear a lot of discussion around it, which kind of indicates to me that this may not be an episode a lot of people are fond of, and maybe it might be considered a not-so-great episode. So, what is my opinion on this episode? Does this continue the streak of good episodes to 4? Is this an average episode? Or does it break the streak and give us a terrible or below average episode? Well, let's find out, shall we? So let's take a look at the episode to see whether I think it is a good or bad episode of the Scooby Doo Show. The episode begins late at night in Vulture's Claw Botanical Gardens, where a postman is knocking on the door of a mansion, delivering a package for Professor Greer, who does his studies at the garden. Suddenly, a 7-foot-tall praying mantis creature appears and attacks the postman, forcing him to speed off in his truck, terrified. Meanwhile, the gang is going to visit Professor Greer at the Botanical Garden. They arrive at the front gate of Vulture's Claw Botanical Gardens and swerve to avoid hitting the fleeing postman. Concerned by the mailman's hasty departure, the gang decide to investigate. They encounter an intimidating man who accuses the gang of trespassing. After Velma explains that they are visiting as friends of Professor Greer, the man introduces himself as Harry Keeble, the caretaker of the gardens. He warns them to leave and to take Professor Greer with them, warning them about something big and evil running loose in the gardens before making a suspicious exit, leaving Velma concerned about the professor's safety. The gang make their way through the gardens looking for Professor Greer. Scooby and Shaggy wander off and have a run-in with the praying mantis creature. They flee and run into Fred and the girls and tell them about the mantis, and Professor Greer appears and confirms Shaggy and Scooby's sighting that there is indeed a creature in the garden. Professor Greer takes the gang to his mansion and explains that the mantis creature has been scaring everyone else away and the only one left is Mr. Keeble. Professor Greer shows them a laboratory he found hidden in his mansion and shows them a diary that states the mantis was created when whoever wrote the diary entry made a fatal mistake in an experiment. Velma makes a note that the entry about the mantis is the only entry in the diary. Professor Greer also tells the gang that the mantis didn't start showing up until he started working there. Scooby manages to bring a suspicious man out of hiding who has been eavesdropping. Professor Greer introduces the man as Clive Dickerman, a real estate agent who wants to buy the garden from Professor Greer, and Clive tries to bargain with Greer, but Greer refuses to sell the gardens. Dickerman threatens Greer and makes an ominous exit. Greer tells the gang it would be best if they leave in the morning before anything bad happens to them. The gang has a meeting, and Fred and the girls decide to explore the gardens to investigate. Scooby and Shaggy obviously dislike that idea and decide to go to bed. Shaggy and Scooby, though, then change their mind, realizing that they'll be all alone in the mansion, and as they are about to leave their room, the mantis appears and chases them. One thing I like with this scene is that Fred and the girls don't force Shaggy and Scooby to investigate with them. They just allow them to go to sleep and go to bed. It's just Shaggy and Scooby being their anxiety-filled selves that makes them, chase after them and join them in their investigation. But I also do like this scene in the episode where the mantis is chasing them in their room and they're hiding in the drawers, and then Shaggy and Scooby wonder how they got to the drawers to, I think, one of the closets. And it's like, how do you think, Shaggy and Scooby? You're cartoon characters. And they'll say they'll figure it out later, which I wonder if they did or not, but that was pretty funny. But yeah, the drawer chase scene, definitely my favorite highlight of the episode, and I did like that Shaggy and Scooby were not forced to investigate, but the episode just forced them, rather than Fred and the girls forcing them.
They want us to go along with them when we can be all by ourselves here. All by ourselves? Come on, Scoob. There's safety in numbers. Get that, will you, Scoob? It's just Fred again. Who is it, Scooby?
It's big.
Big? Yeah.
And green.
Green? Yeah.
And scary.
Big and green and scary? Don't tell me it's the mantis.
Mm-hmm.
I asked you not to tell me that. It's the mantis! Yeah!
I'm running.
Yoo-hoo! Over here!
Yoo-hoo.
How'd we do that?
I don't know.
Me neither. But we'll figure it out later. Come on. Keep it down.
Okay. Nice.
Fred! Velma! Daphne! Help!
Meanwhile, Velma, Daphne, and Fred have another look at the laboratory and the diary and find that there is no indication whose diary it is. They find another eavesdropper and discover it's Professor Greer's assistant, Eric Arby. He claims that he ran away when that mantis creature appeared, but then came back to help. Scooby and Shaggy manage to escape the mantis and meet up with the rest of the gang. The mantis makes another entrance and frightens Eric away. After reuniting, the mantis kidnaps Daphne, and Fred, Velma, Scooby, and Shaggy wake up Professor Greer and ask for help in finding Daphne. Professor Greer agrees as soon as he changes. Fred, Velma, Scooby, and Shaggy run out to the garden when they spot a moving light in the window, only to find it was Clive Dickerman snooping around the garden. Fred and Velma begin to question Dickerman, but he escapes into the garden. The mantis then appears and chases the four. They manage to lose him, and then they find Daphne in an old cabin. They run into Mr. Keeble again, and he warns the gang once more before leaving. Upon returning to the mansion, the gang find fresh footprints covered in oil inside. Professor Greer appears, and the mantis' silhouette appears outside the window. Professor Greer flees, leaving behind oily footprints, and then Velma figures it out. Suddenly, the mantis attempts to attack Fred, Daphne, and Velma, but Scooby and Shaggy trap the mantis with a chandelier, and just before they are about to unmask the praying mantis, Fred thinks it's Harry Keeble. But Harry Keeble, who had been hiding in the clock, tells the gang that he isn't the mantis. Daphne thinks that it's Clive Dickerman, who had been hiding in the wall, but he too tells the gang that he isn't the mantis. Shaggy and Scooby think that it's Eric Arby, who had been hiding outside, but he also tells the gang that he isn't the Mantis. Finally, Velma unmasks the Mantis, revealing it to be Professor Greer. Velma explains that the diary in the lab only had one entry, and a serious scientist would have kept better records than that. Fred adds that the equipment wasn't even hooked up, meaning the lab was a ruse. The next clue was in the entrance hall. When Professor Greer ran, he left oily footprints behind, proving he had been outside disguised as the Mantis. Shaggy's confused by this, since they saw the Mantis outside, but Fred tells Shaggy that the Mantis they saw outside the window was just a cardboard cutout controlled by a pulley system, and the growls they heard were just on a tape player. Professor Greer did it because he found oil on the property and wanted to scare everyone away so he could finalize the deal to buy it. Oil on the land was why Dickerman wanted to buy the garden so badly. Keeble tells everyone that he knew there was something fishy going on. Shaggy corrects him by saying something buggy, and the episode ends with Scooby pondering on the word buggy and laughs because he gets the joke. I'm going to give Season 3 Episode 10 of the Scooby Doo Show 2 stars out of 5. Yeah, unfortunately this was a below average episode. It did not live up to the standards of the previous 3, and it's broken the streak of good episodes. I guess sooner or later we were going to get another dud, but it's a shame that, you know, after 3 good episodes, we went back to the terrible ways of the beginning of Season 3. So, yeah, this episode, it wasn't good for me. I could see why it's not talked about a lot in the Scooby-Doo community, and I could see why I don't really go back to this one often, because it's not that great of an episode. It's pretty bland and boring across the board. It, you know, just has a lot of flaws and problems with it. But before I get into my problems with the episode and what makes this episode bad for me personally, I'll first get into the positives of the episode and the small amount of stuff I did actually like in this episode. So starting with the positives, my first one is I think Velma was good enough in this episode. She was decent. She fulfilled her basic role of helping to piece together the clues to help solve the mystery. It's definitely not one of her strongest outings, but I did feel that the gears were turning in her head and that she was piecing everything together. And, you know, she was trying to figure out what was going on at the gardens and was, you know, concerned for the professor's safety. So she was overall, like, decent enough and good enough in this episode to where I felt like she did a good job fulfilling her basic role. Not the strongest outing for Velma, but I did think she was, you know, decent enough. Then we have Shaggy and Scooby. Shaggy and Scooby were their usual funny, cowardly selves. I had a good time with them in this episode. They fulfilled their basic roles of being very funny and cowardly. They had a couple good comedic scenes. They had a good amount of cowardly scenes. And I did like that they helped capture the villain at the end. One thing I didn't mention in the review is that I really like the aspect that the gang have a whole book of traps based on different types of villains. I think one mentions ghosts, one mentions sea monsters, and Fred tells them to go with a specific plan for a 7-foot-tall praying mantis, which is pretty interesting because it just goes to show how experienced the gang is if they have an entire trap book for different kinds of villains, which is really cool. And I think it was kind of cool that even though it was on the fly, I did like that kind of Fred, Daphne, Velma were on the fly bait, and Shaggy and Scooby set the trap and capture the villain. I know it wasn't planned, but it was still kind of cool that it was on the fly, and Shaggy and Scooby helped capture the villains at the end, because they used the trap booklet that they had to capture the mantis at the end. So that was cool. And I do think they fulfilled their basic roles of being very funny and cowardly. So overall, I think Shaggy and Scooby were good in this episode. And, you know, fulfilled their basic roles of being, you know, funny and cowardly, but also helping capture the villain at the end using the cool trap booklet, which I think was awesome. Outside of costume, I found Professor Greer to be a good character. I think he, you know, was decent enough. Like, he wasn't too bad. Like, he kind of gave somewhat of a backstory for the mantis. You know, he gave them the diary, made up this fake story of finding the laboratory. And, you know, he created this elaborate ruse of finding this laboratory, and the mantis being, like, the work, being a accident based on an experiment gone wrong. So, like, he did an overall decent enough job. He gave the backstory for the mantis. It wasn't too detailed, but he did a decent job of fulfilling that role. So, Yeah, I didn't mind Professor Greer in the episode. He was alright. He's definitely not the strongest person outside of costume, but he was decent enough. I felt like he was good enough in this episode because he at least fulfilled the basic role of providing some context and backstory to the Mantis. And my final positive is I thought there were a good number of suspects in the episode. So, you had 3 suspects in the episode. You had Harry Keeble, you had Clive Dickerman, and you had Eric Arby. Technically, Professor Greer could arguably be a 4th suspect. However, because Professor Greer is a friend of the gang's, I didn't really count him as a suspect, and it honestly shocked me that he ended up being the villain, because usually a friend of the gang's is usually not the villain, so it's one of the few times that that's happened, so... But even though he ended up being the villain, I for one, don't count him as a suspect, because we're not supposed to believe he's a suspect. We're supposed to believe he's a friend of the gang's, and he's a victim of the Mantis. We're not supposed to think of him as a suspect. Whereas the episode portrays Eric Arby, Clive Dickerman, and Harry Keeble as potential suspects. So I feel those 3 were really the suspect pool of the episode. It just ended up not being any of the 3 of them, and it ended up being the friend of the gang's who wasn't even a suspect to begin with. But sure, you could argue Professor Greer is like a 4th additional suspect if you want. But whether you count him or not, that's 3 or 4 suspects in the episode. This is a good pool of suspects. If there's one thing this episode does well, it's create a good amount of suspects. The suspects are all equally suspicious. They each have their own motives. They all, are very interesting characters. I feel like this episode does a good job with the suspect pool. It gives us enough suspects to be suspicious about. You're not really sure who to look towards because there's plenty of people with plenty of suspicious behaviors and activities and motives. So the episode does a really good job with the suspect department. It gives you 3 to 4 suspects in the episode to all point to. And that was the strongest aspect and maybe the most positive aspect I can give this episode. So yeah, I think it was good because, we only have 1 villain and there's 3 to 4 suspects. So that's pretty good. That's a good pool of suspects, and it gives us a good amount of leeway to figure out who potentially could be behind the praying mantis costume. But that's all I got for positives for the episode. So I think it's about time we get on to the negatives of the episode and what brings this episode down for me and makes it a below average episode. So starting with the negatives, my first one is I think Fred and Daphne were both weak in this episode. I didn't really get much leadership vibes from Fred. Fred didn't really do a lot for me. He really didn't fulfill his basic role, in my opinion. I don't really feel like he helped piece together the clues to help solve the mystery, and he didn't really create a cool trap in this episode. Sure, you had the trap booklet, and he tells Shaggy what trap to look for, but Shaggy's the one that has the booklet, and he flips through it, and he's the one that sets the trap, and it's on the fly, and it's just a chandelier drop, so it's not really an impressive trap anyways. So to me, I don't really give Fred props for that, so... Yeah, Fred for me was just, overall weak. I just didn't get much out of him. Same thing with Daphne. Unfortunately, after being good in the last episode and having a personal aspect for her, we're back to, weak Daphne in this episode, and it's a shame. I mean, I did like seeing her, being, danger prone and getting kidnapped by the villain, which was cool, but I say other than that, Daphne was pretty weak in all honesty. She wasn't much of a leader. She didn't help piece together the clues to help solve the mystery. She wasn't cowardly or comedic. And she didn't really find any of the clues of the episode. So, yeah, to me, Daphne was pretty weak in this episode. And I felt like her and Fred just overall didn't do a good job for me. They didn't really fulfill their basic roles or stand out in any way. Next up, we have the villain of the episode, who I thought was terrible. I mean... So the main villain is the Mantis, this 7-foot-tall praying mantis. This mantis is one of the worst villains of the Scooby Doo Show. He's not good at all. I didn't find anything about the mantis scary. There was nothing particularly scary about the mantis. Sure, he's like this 7-foot-tall praying mantis, but there's nothing scary about him. He doesn't do anything threatening or hurt the gang in any way or threaten their safety. And I don't really find the appearance of a 7-foot-tall praying mantis to be that scary, and to begin with, it's just a bug, to be quite honest. And it's not entertaining either. It's not a fun and enjoyable villain to watch. It's a pretty boring and terrible and bland villain that really didn't stand out in any way. And, you know, while he fit for the setting, it was like... And while it was something new, it was not really that interesting. And to me, the villain was just terrible. Weak across the board. Didn't really like the villain. Weak and bland. Boring. Anything you want to call it. It's just bad. Like, I just... didn't really like the villain in this episode. The Mantis, for me, just didn't do it. He's one of the weakest, if not the weakest, Scooby Doo Show villains. Then we have the motive of the episode, which I thought was bland as well. So, Professor Greer's main motive is that essentially he wanted to scare everyone away so that he could finalize the deal to buy the land, which had oil on it. Now... this motive is nothing new. I mean, this is a oil land motive, kind of a combination of the both. I mean, he only wants the land because it has oil on it. It's kind of similar in a way to the Minor 49er episode in some aspects, but whereas that episode was like the 4th episode of the first series, you know, Scooby Doo, Where Are You, and the 4th episode in the franchise, it was very early on. It was okay back then because it had layers to it a little bit, and it was different and fresh and unique. But now we're on the 3rd show and the 3rd season of the Scooby Doo Show. We've gotten a fair amount of episodes, and this just isn't interesting. It's just a boring oil land motive. It's not interesting in the slightest, and it's just a weak motive in all honesty. Like, you know... he basically just wants to scare everyone away until the deal gets finalized. I mean, he's going to get the land anyway, so I'm not really sure what the point was in dressing up in the costume and scaring the gang and scaring all the other assistants. I mean, if he just wants to buy the land, there's nothing really stopping him. I mean, Clive Dickerman knew about it, but... I mean, there was no indication that there was any competition between him and Clive for buying this land. It seemed like it was a surefire hit that Professor Greer was going to buy this land, and, you know, Clive was trying to, you know, make a deal with him for the land. And honestly, it would have made more sense had Clive been the villain, because then, you know, it would have been like, oh, he's trying to scare Professor Greer off the land so he can get the deal finalized, you know, rather than Professor Greer getting it. But it doesn't end up being him, and it ends up being Professor Greer, and to me, it's just like, then why did he do it in the first place? And what's the point of scaring the gang? You're friends with the gang. You told them that they're, you know, to leave in the morning, you know, when they wake up. If you had not done anything, they would have just, you know, not even bothered with it, and probably left in the morning. So, like, it really, to be quite honest, I really think this is a weak motive, and I don't really understand why Professor Greer felt the need to dress up. He was going to get the land anyway, so I have no clue why he felt he needed to do this scheme. There was no point to it. I really think it would have made much more sense had Clive Dickerman been the man behind the mask. Because at least if him, or even Harry Keeble, or, you know, Eric Arby, if even one of those 3 men were the villains... I think it would have made so much more sense, because Professor Greer was clearly, you know, aimed to be like a victim and clearly aimed to buy the land. So it would have made sense if one of those 3 guys were trying to scare him out so that he wouldn't get the land, and then one of them can swoop in and buy the land so they can get the oil. It just felt like an unnecessary twist to be like, oh, let's not go for any of these 3 suspects we established, and let's go for the friend of the gangs, who was portrayed as a victim, wasn't portrayed as a suspect, and really has no reason to be dressing up in costume, but he does anyway. It's just so unnecessary, and it was really baffling to me. You know, there's no reason why he should be dressing up, you know, to commit this motive. He was going to get the land anyway and the oil, so I really don't understand the point of him being in costume. So yeah, the motive for me... it doesn't make sense. You know, it's repetitive for one thing. We've seen this before, but it also, like, it just reinforces the idea that it really doesn't make sense why Professor Greer dressed up in costume. He was going to get the land anyway, so I don't know what he was trying to accomplish. It really is so baffling to me. It felt like Hanna-Barbera was going for an unnecessary twist that didn't need to be there, or somebody in the writing staff just, like, didn't catch this because, yeah, somebody didn't do a good job with this with the writing of this episode, because it was very weak, in all honesty, on the villain side. But yeah, boring oil land motive, seen it before, nothing new, no interesting layers to it. It's basically a bit of a retread of the Minor 49er motive, but that motive was way more fresh and unique because it was early on in the franchise, and it had more layers to it than this one. So yeah, bland, boring motive. I found there to be no mystery in this episode. Like, there really wasn't any questions I was asking throughout the episode. Nothing about the villain or the setting. I'm not asking why is this 7-foot-tall praying mantis in the garden, because we get the story of him. And I'm not asking anything else in the episode. So, yeah, there really isn't much of a mystery here. It's more so just feels like a convoluted plot that didn't really need to happen. Like I said before, like, Professor Greer just, made things worse for himself. And it just felt like a completely unnecessary plot and story that, was just rushed out the door because they needed an episode and didn't have enough time to write a good episode or something. So they threw out a poorly written episode. Because to me, this episode is very weak on the writing front. It doesn't make sense at all. There's really no mystery whatsoever. There's no questions I'm asking. Nothing interesting about the episode that I want some answers to. So, yeah, absolutely no mystery in this episode. It was very lacking in the mystery department. I found the clues of the episode to be weak as well. So, the only two clues really in this episode is the diary in the lab and Professor Greer's footprints. Like, those are really the only two clues. And neither of them really do fulfill their basic purpose. I mean, sure, you could argue Professor Greer's footprints narrow down the list of suspects, but he wasn't a suspect to begin with, and it's also very weak in all honesty. And the episode doesn't really present the footprints as being oil footprints. To me, they just look like footprints from the mud. Like, yeah, it indicates he was outside, but that doesn't really prove anything. So yeah, to me, like, the clues don't really narrow down the list of suspects, and they don't really point towards a motive. So, I mean, yeah, again, you could argue the footprints do both, but even if I were to give you the benefit of the doubt on that, it's still very weak. Like, I don't want footprints to explain it. I want, actual pieces of clues, like more interesting stuff, like a piece of paper, with writing on it, or some book or something else, some type of item rather than just footprints. Like, that feels lame to me. And yeah, the diary doesn't really explain much. It just kind of reinforces the idea that this is possibly made up. But we know the clues are supposed to point towards, okay, something more is going on. This isn't a real monster. We expect that. That's to be expected in the episode. What I'm looking for with the clues is, does it help narrow down the list of suspects? And does it, help point towards a motive in the episode? Does it do one or the other, or both? And if it doesn't really do that, then to me the clues are quite weak. And there wasn't really that many of them, and they didn't do either of that. So yeah, clues in my mind, very weak in this episode. Not good clues at all. There was absolutely no atmosphere in this episode. I felt no tension or suspense or creepiness or eeriness throughout this episode from neither the villain nor the setting. I didn't fear for the gang's safety. I wasn't on the edge of my seat wondering what was going to happen next. And I didn't find anything creepy or eerie about the villain or the setting. There was absolutely no atmosphere to be spoken of. Yes, it was dark out, but nothing about the setting or the villain created any sort of atmosphere. It was weak across the board. No atmosphere, no tension or suspense, no creepiness or eeriness. I felt no sort of atmosphere throughout this episode. And my final negative is I found the setting of the episode to be weak as well. So, the main setting of the episode is Vulture's Claw, specifically the Botanical Garden and the mansion. Now, Vulture's Claw to me is uninteresting. We don't know where Vulture's Claw is supposed to be. We don't know if it's in America. We don't know if it's in another country. I don't know where the gang are heading. It also just isn't really that interesting of a setting because the two things that we see in Vulture's Claw are the garden and the mansion. The mansion's nothing new. We've seen plenty of mansions before in Scooby Doo. Not interesting in the slightest. Doesn't stand out anyway. While a garden could be an interesting idea for a setting in Scooby-Doo, because it hasn't really been done before, I don't feel like they executed in a way that it was that interesting. They didn't really execute it that well. It was very poorly executed. And to me, Vulture's Claw overall was a very uninteresting setting. I didn't find anything interesting about the setting whatsoever. Nothing about the garden or the mansion or Vulture's Claw as a whole just interested me. It was completely uninteresting, boring setting. Don't even know where the heck it is. I didn't really care much for the setting of the episode. Overall, guys, I would personally not recommend this episode to fans and newcomers of the show. It's a very terrible episode, very below average episode. It fails on almost every front, with the only saving grace this episode has being Shaggy and Scooby and the pool of suspects. The pool of suspects was definitely the strongest aspect of the episode. But they even dropped the ball on that because it ends up being none of them, and they go with the professor, who shouldn't have been the villain. It made no sense whatsoever. It was completely poor writing. Like, they had a good pool of suspects. They've written them so well, but then they don't even go with any of them, and they end up going with Professor Greer as the man behind the costume. And that, to me, was stupid and lame and terrible writing. So yeah, nothing great about this episode. Shaggy and Scooby, of course, deliver as always. Very rarely do they not deliver. And the pool of suspects were great, but everything else was completely terrible. Below average episode. If it wasn't for Shaggy and Scooby and the suspect pool, this would honestly be one of the worst episodes of the series. And definitely maybe the worst episode, or one of the worst episodes of Season 3. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the review. Please give it a like if you did. Comment down below your thoughts on the episode. Do you like this episode? Do you disagree with me? Do you think this is a good episode? Do you see more positives in it than I do? Do you hate this episode? You know, I'd be interested in that as well. Do you agree with my opinion? Do you think it's below average? Maybe even worse? Maybe you think it's downright awful? Or are you somewhere in the middle where you think it's average and it's decent and it's okay, but it's not good or bad? I'm curious for your thoughts, so let me know. And subscribe for more Scooby-Doo content like this, or if you're just interested in any of my other content, obviously I'll have more Scooby-Doo reviews on the way. This is a Scooby-focused channel. We cover all things in the Scooby-Doo franchise, ranging from the TV shows, the films, the video games, and the books. So if you like that stuff, if you're a diehard or casual Scooby-Doo fan, if you love all things Scooby-Doo and want to join in on each individual discussion on different TV show episodes, movies, video games, and books, then come join the channel and experience some amazing Scooby-Doo content. In my next video, I will continue my 2025 Scooby Month with a review of Season 3, Episode 11 of the Scooby Doo Show, titled The Diabolical Disc Demon. I'm actually really excited for this episode. I haven't watched it in a little while, but I do remember actually liking this episode quite a bit. It's definitely a Scooby-Doo episode that is fondly remembered somewhat in the Scooby-Doo community. So I'm actually really interested to see how this episode plays out. Even though I haven't watched it in a little while, I do have some good memories of it, so I am interested to see if it holds up well. So yeah, I'm really excited to see how this episode works. If it, will be a nice, back to basics episode and will give us a good episode again. Hopefully it'll be a nice rebound episode and can give us another good episode. So if you want to know my thoughts on Season 3, Episode 11 of the Scooby Doo Show, The Diabolical Disc Demon, then come join me next time. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching this video, and as always, peace out.
We got it all together for a brand new show. Scooby Doo is here again, away we go.
Scooby-Doo is running from a spooky ghost.
Shaggy isn't doing what he does